I never meant to find that letter. It was hidden inside a book no one had touched in years. No name, no address, only a single line that felt like it had been waiting for me. It said, "Some things are written once, but meant to be read 1,000 times." And somehow I knew this was one of them. I don't know who wrote it or why, but the moment I began to read, I felt the world tilt just a little, as if something I'd lost long ago had finally remembered where I live.
The day the house went quiet, she thought the silence would last forever. She could still hear the sound of his chair moving in the kitchen, the echo of his laughter rolling through the hall, the way he called her name with that soft warmth that filled the whole world. And now it was gone, like a song cut short before the last note. For weeks, she lived in that stillness, like a ghost, moving from room to room, collecting teacups he used to love, washing blankets that no one would eat from anymore, folding blankets that no one would pull at night. She tried to fill her days with motion, sweeping, watering plants, writing grocery lists that never needed to be filled, but every movement just brought her back to the same emptiness, waiting quietly in every corner. People told her time would heal, but time only made the distance wider between what was and what is. And in that wide space, her heart learned to whisper instead of speak. She started talking to him in her mind, small words, half prayers, half memories, and somehow that made the air feel lighter, like maybe he was listening. It was on an ordinary afternoon that she found the first letter, tucked in the back of the bookshelf where he used to keep his novels. The paper yellowed, the handwriting familiar. She almost didn't open it. Her hands shook, her breath caught, but curiosity and longing moved faster than fear. It began with her name, and just reading it written in his hand pulled tears she had been holding for months. He wrote about the day they met, how she had dropped her umbrella, and how he had picked it up and said something awkward that made her laugh. He said if she was reading this, it meant he hadn't had the chance to say all he wanted, and he hoped these words would find her when she needed them most. She sat on the floor and read it 3 times until the words blurred and the paper softened with tears. There was no explanation for why he had written it, just a note of love, a memory frozen in ink. But it felt like a hand reaching through time, telling her she was still seen, still loved, still not alone. That night she dreamed of him, not as a ghost, but as he was, sitting on the porch, the sun setting behind him, the way he looked at her before saying something simple like, "Come sit with me." And in the dream, she did. And for the first time in months, she woke up without that crushing weight in her chest. The next morning, she made coffee for two again and let it sit untouched across the table. She didn't speak aloud, but she smiled, as if he could see her. And in that smile, she felt something shift, a thin thread of life weaving its way back into the fabric of her days. Weeks passed, and she began to notice small things she hadn't before. The birds that nested near the window, the smell of rain returning to the earth, the way light touched the curtains at noon. She started walking outside again, through the park they used to visit, sitting on the same bench, just watching the world breathe. And she thought maybe healing isn't something that happens all at once. Maybe it's a quiet agreement between the heart and time. One day, while cleaning the attic, she found a box marked with her name. She hesitated, knowing how memories could be both gifts and wounds, but she opened it. Inside were more envelopes, each sealed carefully, each labeled with different words. One said courage, one said forgiveness, one said beginnings. She held them to her chest and cried because somehow he had known she would need them at different times in her life, as if he had left pieces of guidance scattered like breadcrumbs for her to follow back to herself. That night she lit a candle and opened the one labeled courage. It wasn't long, just a few lines. He wrote that courage isn't loud or proud. It's the quiet choice to keep walking even when the path disappears. That love and strength are the same thing, wearing different faces, and that he believed she would find her way again. She read those lines over and over, letting them fill the empty spaces of her heart until they became her own voice whispering back to her. For the next few days, she carried that letter in her pocket everywhere she went, sometimes reading it on the bus, sometimes before bed, as if it were a compass made of paper, reminding her that moving forward didn't mean leaving him behind. It meant carrying what was beautiful about him into the new days ahead. She began to write again, small journal notes about her mornings, about the sound of the city waking up, about the scent of bread from the bakery near her street. She wrote to remember how it felt to be alive and not just existing. And sometimes she wrote to him, as if he were still reading. Slowly, her world grew wider. She started helping at the local library, shelving books, talking to people again, learning their stories. And in each story, she found little reflections of her own. She realized grief connects people in quiet, invisible ways. Every smile, every kind gesture becomes a bridge across the lonely spaces. One evening, a young woman came to the library crying softly over a book. She had lost someone too. They sat together for a long time without many words, and when the girl left, she handed her the letter labeled Courage without explaining why. And the girl just held it close like it was something precious. And in that moment, she understood that maybe that's why the letters had been written, not just for her, but for anyone who needed them. As she watched the girl walk away, she whispered thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe, to him, to life itself, for teaching her that even pain can become a kind of light if you let it shine through you. Days moved like soft ripples across water. Each morning she woke to a house that was a little less heavy, the air a little kinder. She started to hum again without realizing it, small tunes from their past that floated through the kitchen like sunlight. She found herself talking to the framed photograph on the counter. Sometimes she would say good morning, sometimes just smile, and that was enough. The letters sat in their box like sleeping hearts, waiting for her to be ready. She didn't rush. She wanted each one to arrive in its own time. And one afternoon, when the wind outside turned gentle, she felt drawn to open the next envelope, the one marked forgiveness. Her hands trembled as she slid her finger under the flap. The paper felt cool and alive, like it had been waiting for her touch. He had written in the same neat, careful way he always did, every word chosen like a gift. He wrote about how forgiveness is not something we give others first, but something we offer ourselves. How regret can be a cage if we hold it too long. He admitted there were days he had wished he had been braver, softer, more patient, and he hoped that if she ever read these words, she would know that love had always been larger than their mistakes. As she read the letter, she remembered the nights they had argued over small things, the way silence sometimes built walls between them. She remembered her own stubbornness, her own sharp edges. And yet reading his words melted all of it into something gentler. She realized forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about meeting it with kindness. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I forgive you." Then after a pause, she whispered, "I forgive me too." The words felt strange at first, then warm, then right, like unlocking a door that had been closed for too long. After that night, she began to write letters of her own, not to anyone living, but to moments she wished she had handled differently. She wrote to her younger self, to the time she had been afraid to love fully, to the time she had been too proud to apologize. And with each letter, she felt lighter, like she was peeling away layers of sorrow she didn't know she was carrying. The next morning, she walked to the park and buried those letters under the same oak tree they had once sat beneath. She didn't cry this time. She smiled, because now every part of her story belonged to her, not as pain, but as proof that she had lived. When she returned home, the world seemed softer. The smell of his old books felt comforting, not haunting. She made tea, and as she stirred the cup, she noticed the faint imprint of a word under the lid of the letterbox. Beginnings. She wasn't sure if it had always been there, or if she had just missed it, but it felt like a sign, so she opened that one next. The letter titled Beginnings was longer than the others, and it felt different. Not like a goodbye, but like a map. He wrote that beginnings often hide in endings, that sometimes you have to lose what you love to find who you are meant to become. He told her not to shrink her life around the absence of him, but to expand it until it could hold everything they had shared and everything she had yet to discover. He wrote that love is not a chain, it's a seed, meant to grow beyond the two who planted it, and that his greatest hope was that she would keep growing even when he could no longer watch from beside her. When she finished reading, she sat still for a long time, the world outside humming softly, cars passing, distant laughter blending with the wind. And in that sound, she felt his presence, not as something supernatural, but as memory, alive and breathing through the ordinary world. She started saying yes to small invitations again, coffee with neighbors, a community gardening project at the park, volunteering at the shelter. She realized that life wasn't waiting for her to heal, it was inviting her to live, even through the ache. There were nights she still missed him so much, it felt like an ocean pressing against her ribs, but even then she knew how to float now. The pain was no longer drowning her, it was teaching her how to move with the tide. One evening, while organizing her desk, she found another letter tucked beneath the drawer, one she didn't remember seeing before. It was marked simply with a small heart. No word, no title, just that small shape drawn in his handwriting. She smiled and decided she wasn't ready yet. She placed it back and told herself, some things are meant to wait until their own moment arrives. Instead, she focused on the world blooming around her. She planted herbs on her windowsill. She laughed more often, sometimes even at nothing. She began sending small, anonymous notes to people who seemed lonely at the library. Short lines like, "You are seen. You are loved. You are not forgotten." She would leave them inside books and watch people's faces light up when they found them. She didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but it felt right for her. It felt like passing on the light she had once been given. As months passed, the box of letters grew lighter, but her heart grew heavier with gratitude. The two seemed to balance each other. She learned that healing is not the absence of sadness. It is learning to hold joy beside it. She could miss him and still love her life. She could cry and still feel peace. One night during a storm, the power went out. The room filled with the flicker of candlelight, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel afraid. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, listening to the rain. She thought of the first night they had met, when rain had brought them together, and smiled at how the world has a way of circling back to its own poetry. She looked at the last unopened envelope with a small heart on it. She didn't open it that night. She simply placed it beside the candle and said softly, "Not yet," because she had learned that not every answer needs to be known immediately. Some are meant to be lived into slowly, like dawn.
Winter had been long that year, the kind that sits heavy on windows and hearts. She kept busy with small acts that made the days gentler, reading to children at the library, helping her neighbor plant bulbs that would not bloom until spring. She did not notice at first how much lighter her steps had become, until one morning she caught her own reflection in the window and realized she was smiling without reason. The small, unopened envelope with the drawn heart had waited through all of those months, resting on the desk like a heartbeat. She had learned not to rush it. She wanted to meet it from a place of calm, not ache. So she waited until one quiet morning when the air smelled of new rain and the world felt clean. She made tea and sat at the table, the one where they had spent countless breakfasts talking about everything and nothing. She ran her thumb along the edge of the paper before opening it slowly, as if opening time itself. Inside, there were only a few lines, but they felt like an entire lifetime captured in breath. He had written that if she ever reached this letter, it meant she had already walked through the hardest parts, and now it was time to look forward. He told her to live boldly, not in the loud sense of the word, but in the way sunlight enters a dark room without apology. He said that people often think love ends when the person is gone, but real love keeps building new rooms in your soul long after the walls have changed. He reminded her to keep creating beauty even from pain, because beauty is the language love leaves behind. She read those lines again and again until they became her own thoughts, whispering back to her. Then she folded the paper and placed it inside her journal. She did not cry. She simply breathed and felt something open inside her, a soft certainty that she could love the world again. That day she went out walking, further than she had in months. She passed the cafe where they had shared their first date. She smiled at the memory of spilled coffee and nervous laughter. She passed the park and saw the oak tree, now surrounded by green shoots, the very ground she had buried her letters in, alive again. It felt like a conversation between earth and heart, reminding her that what is buried is not always gone. Sometimes it is simply waiting to grow. In the following weeks, she began to create small projects at the library, a reading circle for women who had lost someone, a shelf of books about starting over. She called it Unwritten Letters. The idea was simple. Anyone could take a blank page, write what they wish they had said or needed to hear, and leave it for another reader to find. Soon the shelf filled with folded notes, some of them shy and short, others pages long. And when people found them, they smiled, cried, and sometimes left new ones in return. The library became filled with whispers of healing, each note a small bridge between strangers. She would watch from the desk, a heart full, seeing people connect without even knowing each other's names. Names unnecessary, stories shared in silence. It was as if the love she thought had ended had simply changed form, spreading quietly through other lives. One afternoon, she received a letter herself, left on the same shelf. It said, "Your words helped me speak again. Thank you." And she sat there for a long while holding that note, knowing that love had completed a circle. It had gone out and returned, not from him, but from the world he had asked her to keep loving. Her days grew busy in gentle ways. She started teaching writing workshops, helping others find their voices. She would tell them that words do not fix broken hearts, but they remind us that the heart is still beating. She spoke softly, but her words carried the weight of truth, and people listened. As spring turned into summer, she felt ready to visit the sea, a place they had always promised to go but never did. She packed a small bag and one of his letters, not for sadness, but as a companion for the journey. When she arrived, the sky stretched endless and kind. She walked along the shore, feeling the waves pull and release around her feet, and thought about how life does the same. She sat on the sand, reading his words one last time, the paper fluttering in the wind. She whispered, "Thank you," then folded it and let the tide carry it away. Not as goodbye, but as continuation, because she understood now that love doesn't live in the things we keep, it lives in what we give back. That evening, she stayed to watch the sunset, the sky turning every shade of golden rose. She felt him in the warmth on her skin, in the sound of the waves, in her own steady breath. For the first time, she didn't wish to hold on. She simply wished to live fully. On the way back home, she stopped by a small cafe, the kind with old wooden chairs and mismatched mugs. She sat near the window and began writing again. Not a letter to the past, but to the future. She wrote about hope, about how strength is not something we find, it is something we remember. She wrote that every ending carries a seed of beginning, if we are brave enough to plant it. When she looked up, a little girl at the next table was watching her. The girl smiled shyly, and she smiled back, then tore a small piece of paper from her notebook and wrote, "You are enough," handing it to her. The girl grinned wide, and in that grin, she saw a spark of every reason she had ever loved and lived. That night, when she returned home, the house no longer felt empty. It felt alive with echoes and presence, not haunting, but comforting. She placed the final empty envelope on the table and whispered, "I have written mine own now." And she knew, somewhere, somehow, he would be proud.
Morning light slipped through the curtains, quiet and golden. She woke to the sound of sparrows and the faint hum of the city already stirring. She sat for a while, just breathing in the stillness, the kind of stillness that no longer hurt. It simply existed, like a calm sea after a storm. She looked around the room and saw not what was missing, but what remained. Books, worn and loved, plants growing toward the sun, a photograph that now made her smile instead of ache. She poured herself a cup of tea and carried it to the window, the same window where she had once watched days blur into one another. Now, each day felt distinct. She noticed the details she used to miss, the way light changed color as it moved across the walls, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery below, the laughter of a child drifting from the street, and she thought, how strange and beautiful it is that life goes on and invites us to join it again and again. The box that had once held the letters now held only the scent of paper and the quiet memory of ink. She didn't feel the need to open it anymore. It had done its work. It had carried her from darkness to dawn. She traced her fingers along its edges one last time and whispered, "Thank you." She did not mean only him. She meant every person, every moment that had helped her find her way back. She began to write less about pain and more about presence. She filled pages with descriptions of mornings like this, with gratitude for small mercies, with questions that no longer needed answers. Sometimes she wrote just to listen to the sound of her own thoughts, becoming gentle. People from the library still came to her with their letters, their stories, their soft confessions. She would read them quietly, sometimes reply, sometimes just hold their hands. She had learned that comfort does not always need words. Sometimes being there is enough. She kept the shelf of unwritten letters alive, adding new pages when the old ones were taken away. And she knew that somewhere someone would find the exact sentence they needed at the exact moment they were ready, just as she once had. Seasons moved in their patient rhythm. Spring to summer, summer to fall, each bringing its own color, its own lesson. She visited the sea every year on the same day, not as a ritual of loss, but of gratitude. She would sit on the sand, close her eyes, and listen to the waves as if they were old friends, telling her that everything in life moves in circles, leaving and returning, changing yet familiar. There were still nights when she missed him, nights when a song or a scent would bring back the ache, but she no longer fought it. She let it pass through her like wind through leaves, knowing that it would go and come again. She understood now that missing someone is another way of loving them across time and distance. One evening she sat on the porch, watching the sunset melt into twilight.
a soft breeze carrying the scent of jasmine. She thought about all the letters she had written, all the ones she had received, and all the ones she never would. And it struck her that life itself is a letter. We are constantly writing to the world. Every act of kindness, every tear, every smile, an unfinished sentence offered to whoever might need it. She closed her eyes and let that thought settle, the way embers settle after a fire, not burning, not cold, just quietly glowing. She whispered a small prayer of thanks, not to any name in particular, but to the vast, tender mystery that allows hearts to break and heal again. The stars began to appear one by one, gentle as forgiveness. She felt the night wrap around her like a familiar shawl. She thought about how far she had come, how every letter had been a step, every memory a lantern. She no longer looked back with longing. She looked forward with peace. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Good night, love," knowing that somewhere within the folds of the universe, that love would hear her and smile. And that was enough. The candle on her table flickered once, then steadied its light. Small, steady, unafraid. Just like her.
So if you ever find a letter you weren't meant to read, hold it gently, because maybe, just maybe, it found you for a reason.